This is Modern Gaming Culture. This series will attempt to highlight the phenomenon of PC, console, and mobile gaming and bring to light all of its phenomenal aspects. Let's take a dive together into the world of modern gaming and take apart its structure. Now, here's your host, Rotimi Osagi. All right, this is Modern Gamer Culture. This is episode 2, Modern Gamer Culture. Episode 1 of Modern Gamer Culture did on October 16th. Um, and the episode was actually just an outtake I was doing. And I liked it so much after going over it that I decided to make it the first episode. So, this is actually the official first episode of Modern Gamer Culture. So, welcome to Modern Gamer Culture. I'm your host, Rotimi Osagi. And this is an internet radio show. And, immediately right there, I know that, I've already lost like 99% of people because the term internet radio is not really a very common term used in modern day English parlance. And so, um, people are not really familiar with that term, so they don't really know what it means. Um, internet radio, is a field of um, the internet economy. Um, that has existed pretty much since the since the internet has really existed as a public forum, and internet radio has gone through its ups and downs, right? When iTunes came out and unleashed a podcast onto the world, right? Um, People were really taking up that torch of um, being part of the internet culture, right? And you know things were really going well for internet radio, right? Up until like the mid 2010s, right? Shortly after um, platforms like YouTube um, changed ownership, and um, these platforms became increasingly more draconian in terms of their policies, and um, instituted a lot of very draconian measures related to free speech on their platform that people did not really agree with, right? Um, and they censored a lot of people who were really taking the world by storm in terms of their influence when it comes to internet culture, right? Through this medium of internet radio. Um, and it was one of the most devastating attacks on free speech, in modern history. And if you weren't really following any of these influencers, when they were at the peak of their careers, right? Um, you know, you don't even know what I'm talking about. Um, so it's pretty bad, right? I can name tons, right? A lot of people are really recovered, right? People like Alex Jones, David Icke, who were taken off of YouTube stuff on well know, right? But largely a lot of people who were I would consider small time, but in terms of their reach, were big time, right? Um, for internet radio particularly, right? really understand the reach that people really have, right? When now it's not like a local to semi-local reach, right? Now it's a global reach. So you don't really know who's really interfacing with your content, right? And so when you're hitting numbers of like, 150, 200,000 followers, right? I mean, that is powerful, right? And so, having those people taken off of um, the public forum, right, to really express their thoughts, was very dangerous proposition, right, for the sustainability of the internet, right? I consider the time we live in to be an internet dark age, and um, you know, it would take you know considerable amount of time scrolling through the internet to really find quality material, right, that was published on the internet, right, not just mirrored on the internet or something like that, right? Um, the internet, um, its accessibility, right, and its integration into society was, has been so rapid, right, um, that um, you know it hasn't really been able to be regulated, right? The um, the uh, ability to publish on the internet, right? And so, people have really just had, carte blanche to um, publish on the internet, right? Um, and so it's pretty, it's not easy to, um, participate in what I call internet oversight, um, effectually, because you have to go through so much garbage, right, to like find a nugget of gold. It's almost like it's a fool's errand to really do it. What it really feels like these days, right? So, you know, it's largely due to a lot of these agendas that have really people have really taken, have really championed, right? I talk about how people, you know, are filling jobs that don't really be needed, right? When you talk about, this bureaucracy, right, that is really, you know, taking over society, right? Academia, you know, um, governments. Um, it's very, it's very hard to really get dirt on people, right? When they are so insulated from reality, right? These people, couldn't find their ass with both hands. A lot of these people who are in bureaucracy, right? And they are given, you know, the capacity for, um, you know, um, subsistence living, right, through the apparatus of the state, um, and raise the proverbial middle finger to people who are really um, doing real work, right? It's like it's like it's there's no better definition for um, a perfected, you know, sick, right? A perfected sick program, right? Running, right? Um, which we'll talk about on this show, right? So it's something that really is um, something that needs a lot of unpacking, right? This is not something you're just going to get, listening to me for, a couple minutes, right? And then trying to, you know, piece together the rest, right? This is something that needs eclectic research and eclectic data gathering, right? Um, Skillful data gathering, right? Um, Usage of critical thinking skills, right? Um, you know, um, Battle heartedness, right? Um, Heartedness, right? Um, you know, Posturing. These are things that are very important when it comes to, tackling a lot of these issues, right? Um, Something I talked about in that first episode, right? Is my responsibility as the teacher in this relationship, right? Talk about how this is a student teacher relationship. Um, you know, to strike a balance, right, between pace, temperance, delivery, right, and personality, right? Because understand that when it comes to the proliferation of this information, when it comes to the effectiveness, right, and the preparedness to do so, I definitely consider myself very much out in the front when it comes to that, particularly when it comes to what I call gaming culture, right, or modern gaming culture, right? Hence the name of this show. Particularly when it comes to what I'm talking about when I refer to modern gaming culture, right? And so it's something I have to be very careful when I'm live, right? Even right now, I'm live, right, and my family's home, and they're uh, you know, chattering with each other, right? Um, you know that I don't let my emotions get in the way of what I'm trying to say, right? Um, Something I also touched on a little bit in the first episode as well is that when you go on the internet and you're looking for someone to listen to, right? And you turn on and you see a black person, right? Unless the person is Neil deGrasse Tyson, I mean you're immediately suspect, right? I have a responsibility to address a lot of those things because they're very real issues, they're very real dynamics that need to be addressed on this show, right? Understand that as much as I have what I consider the solution in hand, so to speak, right? I also understand that, because of a lot of societal bias, right, and a lot of societal dynamics, right, and a lot of also psychological dynamics as well that we're going to get into on this show, right? People are going to be very less apt to listen to me because of all of these things, and they're going to have to do a lot of what's called shadow work, right, in order to really, prepare themselves to listen to me, right? I consider these first episodes are going to be pretty lighthearted, right? Um, but if you're not preparing yourself, to listen to my next show, right? What you're going to find is that this show is going to become increasingly more difficult to listen to, right? And so, I don't recommend that, if you're a new viewer to the show, right, you just start here, right? In terms of just trying to just get in, right? And you find episode 79, right? And you're like, oh, modern gamer culture. This looks interesting, right? This is something I'm going to try to emphasize as well, right? Because again, right, this is not something where you can just well, again, right, like I talked about, this show doesn't just represent, me just coming on the air, right, and just you know point the camera at myself and then just talking for a bit until I feel tired. You know, I prepared very much, right, months in ahead, right, for the show, right, and so you know, uh, this is something that has to be treated with respect. Okay, right, like this is not something where you can come on, you can be entertained, right? I'm gonna try to be entertaining, right? I understand the audience I'm trying to reach. I understand that these people don't need someone, lighting a fire under their ass, right? They need people who are going to, help guide them through a lot of tough times, right? Um, you know, Mastering this material is not easy, right? And so, I'm not going to rail on people who are trying, especially understanding, people in gaming culture are busting their butts day in and day out, right? I mean, these people, you do like people really don't know what's here, right? This is something I'm going to be talking about as well. You know, a lot of people, right, who are really, I would say, what I call mavens, right, in a lot of social science circles, right. These are people, right, who are um, very influential in society, right, in terms of their social circles, right. And these people, right, um, you know, I feel like when it comes to generally how society works right these days, right, a lot of these people who are able to maintain, secure, stable, lifestyles, right, do so at the expense of living a very sheltered life, right? And so as a result, they're very unfamiliar with sort of what is around them, right? And so, um, you know, protected by the, shell that is their security, right? They are unequipped, to really take on, you know, um, the battle that faces them, right? And so, um, it's something where you know despite that people still are um you know kicking ass day in and day out, right. And so these people don't need someone yelling at them telling them when it comes to modern gamer culture particularly, right, these people don't need, right, um people just yelling at them telling them they're garbage or they're not working hard enough. These people are kicking ass, right? These are things that we're going to be talking about on the show. But again, right, I'm trying to really make sure that I'm not drowning people, right? So, um, you know, for this, what I call the first official episode, right? You know, I don't want to start just airing out laundry, dirty laundry, just for the sake of airing out dirty laundry, right? I really want to get to know people, right? Again, internet publishing is not something I'm unfamiliar with. And so when it comes to, viewer counts and engagement and stuff like that, even on the pretty much non existent scale that I've really received it, right? I understand, um, how you should tailor your content with respect to your reach and engagement, etc. Right. And so I'm not going to, try to turn this into some sort of, you know, autobiography or something like that, right? Where I'm really trying to give a very detailed account of my life or something like that, right? Trying to convey information here, right? And so, um, you know, something like this is a project where I'm actually trying to reach a lot of people, right? A lot of projects I've done before have really just been passion projects, right? And so, something like this, right, where I consider this, right, a foundation, of the operation I'm trying to set up, right? With regards to the operations that, I am associated with, right? Um, you know, I don't want to, um, I don't want to sort of Sort of lost my train of thought there. Um, I don't want to hold on. I lost my train of thought. Anyways, um, so with something like this, right? It's not going to be something where I'm just going to come here, and just be like, you know, oh my gosh, I hate everyone, you know, like everyone should just die. Like I'm just so pissed off, people are just so garbage, whatever, 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 right? Um, you know, when I was doing my passion project, I was definitely just very laid back, right, and not really, you know, trying to do anything, so to speak, right? I was just, testing my skills out, getting my feet wet, right? And having a good time, right? And so when it came to direction and all that, I was just like, as long as I finish to my satisfaction, I'm fine, right? But with something like this, right, where I'm also trying to do all of that, right? I'm also keeping in mind that, you know, I trying to, bring something into the world, right, which wasn't here before, right? You know, and so you know that entails a lot of responsibility to, the people you're trying to reach, and also with just striking a balance, right, so that you're not, missing the mark, right? So I try to, you know, be personable, right? But also at the same time, I'm also trying to um, integrate a lot of the material which I'm going to be um, eventually covering on the show, right? So that people's appetites are already wet, right? When you know, um, when actually presenting that material in earnest, right? So I was talking a lot about on this show. I was expanding a little bit on what I was talking about in the first episode, right? About personalities, right, on the internet, right, and also just internet radio stuff like that. Those are going to be topics that we're going to be discussing on the show, right? Those are going to be mainstay topics, that are going to make their rounds on these shows, right? I feel like those topics are very important, especially when it comes to these first few episodes, particularly because, again, this is something I'm trying to really reach people with, right? I'm really trying to make an impact with this, right? And so, as opposed to my other projects, where I was just having a good time, right? Um, you know, this is something that is going to be part of my portfolio, so to speak, right? And so, this is going to be a lot more different of a vibe, right, if you will, right? And so, I want people to be prepared for that, right, and not just drop the hammer on them, right? You know, I mean, even that alone, right? These first few episodes, right, where I want to be just sort of expanding a little bit of a time, right, on you know, um, the internet censorship wave that occurred in the mid 2010s, right? And then also, me as a personality, right, and how I'm viewed in society, right? Um, you know, these are things when you go on the internet, right, and you're looking for something to listen to. Nobody's talking about this stuff at all, right? Like, I mean, you, I mean, gosh, it's laughable, right? It really is. People with millions of viewers, right, that tune in, right when their stuff drops, right, and you tune into what they just made, right, in terms of their addition to their content, and it's like these guys are talking about, you know, the effects of Trump's tariffs or whatever the fuck, right, right. It's just like I mean, I don't know. Like these people's their points are not turning, right? I mean, these are things, right, where these things have been part of our society for decades, right, and people are still, you know, like at day one of this stuff become and introduce it to society, right? It's just like it's horrifying. It really is, right? Um, and so in all of that, right, understanding people in modern gaming culture, right, who are you know um, conducting internet oversight, right, as I call it, right, and then having to deal with all of that, verbal diarrhea being spewed at them, right, and then come into what I want to turn into the hub, of you know um, dialogue when it comes to modern gaming culture, right? And then being told, you're a piece of garbage, you're not working hard enough, blah blah blah. It's not gonna help anybody, right? Um, so I understand, right, that experience of conducting internet oversight, right? And so, I'm not going to come here and tell you you're a piece of garbage, okay? And in the in the conclusion of the first episode, right? It was pretty cryptic, right? For sure, you know. Um, but you know, I really want people to understand, I'm not trying to become your enemy, right? I want In fact, I want you to become my friend. Okay, I'll just come out right out and say it. Okay, I do want to, make friends doing this. I do want people to be friendly, right? I want people to, consider me someone they can talk to, right? I want people to, enjoy my company, right, while I'm presenting, while they're listening to my presentation, right? Um, you know, I want to, you know, have the proverbial internet friendship, all right, um, through this work, right? Because I understand, with what I'm trying to create, right, I can't, leave that out of, the realm of possibility, right? I have to be, welcomed out with open arms, right? So, it's um, something where um, it's going to be something that's very important, right? So because of that, I have to make sure I'm not you know burning this operation to the ground, right? You know, um, so you know, um, I think I'll leave it there for the formal part of this episode, right? Um, so to conclude, you know, again, right? I finished off the first episode pretty cryptic, right? Um, but being cryptic is a very important part of battling in the gaming arena, right? People can't really, you know, be privy, to your new shit, so to speak, right? Um, so you know, almost it was almost like a little jab, right, at people, right, being cryptic like that, right? Especially considering, I wasn't even planning on posting that, so I was just like, you know what? Honestly, I can be as cryptic as I like, right? Because nobody's even gonna see this unless I send it to somebody, right? And so, I'm just like, I was. That's just, that's just how I am, right? People always tell me I'm cryptic, and so, if I'm just doing something for practice, right? And I'm just like, nobody's even gonna see this, you're on your own, you're your own worst critic, as they say, right? And so I'm just like, if I'm gonna be silly, I might as well be silly for myself. So don't expect any of that, because I'm not that spooky. There's a lot of cool shows, um, pop culture shows, people with spooky characters, particularly like X Files, with Fox Mulder, right? He's technically the main character, but he was out for like 2 or 3 seasons. I don't know. If people want to watch the show, I don't want to spoil it, but X Files is a pretty cool show. I think it started airing in 1991, 1992, and then it finished in like 2016, I believe. It was a they did a relaunch of the show, I think, and then it was one season. But you know, um, I know I don't want to enter that arena of spooky pop culture icons, right? So um, you know don't expect all that stuff, right? I can definitely channel that energy, get really spooky, but I'm not, that's not how I am, day to day. I'm a pretty chill guy, well, the most chill guy you ever meet, right? So but again, that's just a lot of part of what we're talking about this show, right? We're gonna get into a lot of that stuff, right? So this has been Modern Gamer Culture. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you.